Kingdom Hearts is an RPG, making leveling a defining feature. The no experience ability flips it on its head by preventing leveling up beyond level 1. I'll be discussing and comparing the combat of Kingdom Hearts 1, Kingdom Hearts 2, and Kingdom Hearts 3 while playing on level 1. While focusing on how the combat plays on level 1, many things will apply in any difficulty, with differences being highlighted. Level 1 essentially acts as an extra difficulty beyond critical mode as the game's true hardest difficulty. While it could reasonably fit in the difficulty menu above critical mode, it's hidden in the ability menu. This prevents new players from accidentally choosing it while giving veterans immediate access. Level 1 runs are forgiving because you can opt out at any time by turning off the no experience ability. The irreversible nature of turning a run into a leveled one removes the temptation to skip tough encounters by turning it off. Unlike most difficulty settings, this doesn't need to be explicitly communicated because most people implicitly understand how leveling works. Level 1 being an explicit option indicates it's not just possible, but intended to beat Kingdom Hearts at level 1. This can be seen in KH2, where the changes in critical mode align seamlessly with level 1. Critical gives a damage bonus to help mitigate the reduced damage of level 1, gives 50 extra AP to mitigate level 1's lack of AP, and gives access to several abilities that can usually only be accessed through leveling. In addition to the changes in critical mode, Final Mix version changes it so Scan is obtained after defeating Axel instead of at level 4, making it so Scan can be used in a level 1 run, unlike in KH1. KH1's level 1 mode feels less integrated because it was added in the HD remakes. Despite being retroactive, several changes improved the experience, such as a safety net preventing one-hit deaths at full HP. Since health is obtained through leveling in KH1, it would otherwise be a no-hit run and invalidate the healing mechanics. While the other games have a minimum damage floor on all difficulties that applies to every enemy, KH1 only applies the damage floor to bosses in level 1 runs to guarantee reasonable damage is dealt. KH3 extends the difficulty settings further through the premium menu, giving a modular way to alter difficulty. Most of the modifiers make changes that can be self-imposed, making most of the menu redundant. The HP and MP slip modifiers are exceptions because they slowly drain HP and MP over time, which cannot be self-imposed without the premium menu. Level 1 runs wouldn't be possible without an in-game option since it changes the way the existing systems work instead of removing them like the premium menu does. Due to the absence of level progression, the game plays out quicker since most enemies can be skipped. Instead, you spend more time in forced encounters that are designed to challenge you in more meaningful ways. Because most of the game is spent on challenging encounters, the difficulty curve is more consistent than a leveled run. Spikes in difficulty are minimized due to the increase in challenge. Gaining stats on the level 1 run is mostly irrelevant due to the way stat calculation in Kingdom Hearts works. Enemy defense applies a flat damage reduction to damage dealt, with a minimum damage floor being used anytime defense is above your strength, which happens for a majority of the run. Someone might struggle with the boss and equip a Keyblade with a higher strength stat to deal more damage, misdirecting them and causing confusion. Changing it so the damage reduction from defense to being percentage based, with the damage being added to the damage floor instead of replacing it, would make stats always relevant while ensuring damage is reasonable throughout an entire playthrough. Despite the level 1 constraint, there are ways to progress aside from stats, such as magic, summons, forms, and keyblades. Each one of these are more meaningful than a stat increase because changing your toolset affects the way you play the game and requires skill to use. Unlike a stat increase that merely amplifies damage with the same gameplay, acquiring ability creates a parallel increase in both your skill and Sora's capabilities. Since abilities are given at set points, the order worlds are done changes what abilities are obtained. In KH2, beating Thresholder in Beast Castle gives upper slash, enhancing combos against Shan Yu and opening the path to acquiring Trinity Limit in Olympus, which can be used against Beast Castle's final boss. If you find Shan Yu harder than Beast Castle's boss, you can beat it to have Cure, Chicken Little, and Trinity Limit to defeat Shan Yu. Chests fulfill a similar role in KH2, where the challenge isn't finding them, but being able to progress to that point. For example, beating the Pirate encounter and the first encounter with Grim Reaper lets you progress to the room that has the Peter Pan summon. Because abilities are given at set points, bosses can be designed around those options since every player will have access to them. Every boss in KH2 and KH3 can be designed around Guard because you learn it early. This isn't true for KH1 because Guard can be obtained as early as level 15 but as late as level 33. The early game fight against Tidus, Waka, and Selphie have been specifically designed to utilize parrying because Sora has access to limited tools by that point. That fight functions differently to later fights because it relies on focused aggression on Sora that wouldn't be possible if party members were distracting the enemies. KH2 has several fights that limits options after obtaining them when party members are taken away, such as against Sephiroth or Roxas. These bosses can be fought with a more complex moveset than a boss at the start of the game while locking off several options like most limits, forms, and summons. KH3 does something similar by giving the option to play as alternate characters during the remind fights that allows the stats and abilities of the characters to be tuned to the boss that they're fighting. Having limited options teaches the habit to use tools that wouldn't otherwise be used. If dodge roll was given at the start of KH2, someone might never learn the usefulness of guarding because they become dependent on dodge rolling since it's easier to perform and gives a clearer effect than guard. By spreading tools throughout the game, it allows people to test each tool one by one, avoiding them getting overwhelmed at the start. KH3 giving all the abilities at the start of critical interferes with the learning process. While these abilities might have been used by somebody on easier difficulties, they might still not have used or understand those abilities because they're not required to if the game is too easy. When confronted with a challenge that relies on knowledge of Sora's entire moveset, someone not understanding it can create a wall of difficulty. Since abilities are obtained through game progression, the purpose of leveling in Kingdom Hearts, other than feeling good, is as a modular difficulty scaler through grinding. On level 1, Sora's relative damage remains fairly consistent throughout the game because the damage floor increases to match the enemy's health. You're dealing more damage, but the enemies are gaining more HP to counter it, creating a balance between Sora's stats and the enemies that progress at the same rate. On a leveled run, the damage is higher than a level 1 run, but it remains fairly consistent within itself. While the amount of damage increases throughout a run, the percentage of health remains relatively the same. This balance only changes if you grind to throw that balance towards Sora's favor, making leveling act as an irreversible difficulty scaler. It is always beneficial to be a higher level, but equipping items has trade-offs to it because there's a limited amount that can be equipped, forcing a choice between limited options. Despite being level 1, grinding is still present through grinding better consumable items. This allows level 1 to cater to lower skill levels while disincentivizing grinding because of the time commitment. Giving difficulty settings that can be changed with ease can tempt people to invalidate a challenge run they are otherwise capable of beating. People become more willing to engage with the boss if the alternative is to have their time wasted. Items being consumables means you need to grind them for each encounter because they're not permanent like levels are. This forces more consideration of which boss to grind for because grinding for every boss becomes time consuming to the point where learning fights take less time. There is also a limit to how much grinding can be done in level 1 because only a maximum of 8 items can be held at once. Most RPGs let you stock up to 99 potions and trivialize a boss due to the abundance of healing making you invincible. Items give a way to make encounters easier without letting you grind to the point of trivializing a fight like you can on a leveled run. While KH1 and KH3 spread their gameplay over several different types to break up the pace, KH2 focuses on its combat to break up the pace by giving variations on it. KH1 uses puzzles, exploration, and platforming to break up the combat, mostly using Sora's base moveset. Repurposing Sora's moveset for different gameplay types limits them because his moveset is not conducive to them. While Sora's jump works well for combat, it doesn't have enough height or variability to make it all that interesting for platforming, mostly amounting to holding forward and jumping with maybe a keyblade swing to extend the jump somewhat. Most puzzles amount to using a specific spell on a specific object in a key and lock fashion. The puzzle is to figure out what the pieces are instead of how to put them together. This mostly boils down to people either making the connection immediately, reading the sign that tells them the answer, or not realizing there's a puzzle at all. KH3 tries to remedy this by designing new control types that are more conducive to the unique gameplay styles, such as when Sora enters a mech, hops some Baymax, rides a shield, uses a ship, rides a Heartless, hides behind cover, grinds on rails, or uses attraction flows, which are denoted by the command menu showing new controls. Changing controls can be cumbersome if the controls have been remapped in any way, such as keyblade switching being mapped to the shoulder buttons. Some of these are quick and transition seamlessly between normal gameplay, but others take a long time while reducing the depth of moves that Sora has, such as the Baymax boss fight, reducing the options to 4 for an entire boss. Most of these changes in gameplay happen a few times at most, so they tend to remain novel enough, but attraction flows appear in almost every battle, so the novelty can wear off quickly but is still not nearly as complex as normal fighting to compensate. Because the combat is the most fleshed out system in Kingdom Hearts, KH2 gives variations on the combat pace of the game, such as needing to survive for a minute in the Caribbean world, having several combat modifiers in the Colosseum, needing to kill enemies in time for the Solar Sailor, needing to protect the door in Hollow Bastion, needing to keep the morale gauge up in the Land of Dragons, among others. These variations share a commonality of the bar in the top left, creating a secondary objective to killing enemies. This difference between KH2 and KH3 becomes apparent when comparing the Mushroom 13 to the Fantastic 7. All of the Mushroom 13 consists of battles that stress the combat system in a way that otherwise wouldn't be possible or natural, while the majority of the Fantastic 7 consists of minigames that are removed from the combat entirely. Even some of KH2's bigger changes in gameplay still retain many of the combat elements, allowing them to have a lot of relative depth since they're borrowing the depth from the base systems. While the Carpet Ride and Agrabah and Lion and Pride lands might strip away many of the mechanics, they still retain the depth present in the Keyblade combos, magic, items, and jumping, while adding their own nuances with their movement. The most gimmicky worlds and gameplay types tend to be optional, like 100 Acre Woods in all three games, Atlantica in both KH1 and KH2, and Pride Lands in KH2. KH1 has labyrinthian style rooms to navigate with platforming. KH3 has open spaces to explore that use several traversal tools to add verticality, and KH2's worlds are small and linear by comparison. KH2's worlds have the least to them and would be the most boring to traverse in a vacuum, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They're designed to serve the combat. Port Royal has light and dark areas that change whether you can damage enemies. The building site in Timeless River constantly pushes you up to force aerial combat. Halloween Town has a carousel that can be used to draw enemies in. The treasure room in Agrabah forces you to fight in a tight space. Disney Castle has a long hallway for an escort mission for Minnie, among other examples. The world and combat work in tandem with each other in KH2. Sora's slow movement in KH2 is designed around the combat, with its use traversing worlds being a byproduct. While aerial dodge can be used as a double jump for traversal, its primary use is for dodging in the air, shown by a lack of places to use aerial dodge for traversal. Sora's slow movement speed constrains the world to be small enough that they don't take too long to traverse. The skateboards give a way for speed to be higher outside of combat without affecting the balance of speed in combat. People often argue that the Roxas Prologue is bad because it drags with menial tasks that contrast with the rest of the game that makes repeat playthroughs tedious. If you skip all the cutscenes, it takes about half an hour that consists mostly of fights. You fight the Twilight Thorn boss, the Struggle Tournament fights, the Nobodies Before Axel, the Axel boss fight, Shadow Roxas, the Data BVs, the Nobody fight that Axel summons, the Nobodies in the Mansion, then the final Axel fight. The only gameplay that isn't fighting in the Roxas segment are the minigames to save up money and 2 of the 7 wonders. Because of KH1's lack of extra systems, more emphasis is put into connecting basic swings, with precise positioning and timing influencing whether hits connect. Since most abilities in a KH1 level 1 run aren't obtained, the basic 3-hit combo is the only option available for the majority of it. This combo is a huge commitment on the ground because of the amount of end lag of the third hit. The aerial version has less lag to it but is harder to use in grounded opponents, making it a reward for the increased skill needed to pull it off. While grounded combos will change depending on how close you are to the enemy to help them connect easier, aerial combos will do the same string regardless of position. These contextual combos act as a crutch for new players, but skilled players can understand when each attack will trigger and purposely put themselves in context that will trigger the desired attack, rewarding high skill without punishing low skill. Hitting an enemy alters your momentum, such as the first and third aerial hit launching you forward. This shift in momentum can put you in a bad situation after hitting or cause the attack to miss altogether. The change in positioning after a combo needs to be accounted for when landing to properly chain them together. Your downwards momentum will be stalled, sometimes causing subsequent attacks to miss if done too high, which needs to be accounted for by delaying subsequent attacks. Another reason to delay attacks is to hit surrounding enemies by timing when they come into range to stagger or parry them, acting as crowd control. Whipping a move puts you in a very vulnerable state due to the lag of your moves and the lack of staggering enemies, incentivizing proper timing and positioning of attacks. The last hit of a combo is a combo finisher that deals higher damage and sends enemies flying, which can be useful for separating enemies. Purposefully not using the combo finisher keeps the enemies close while you're staggering them for increased aggression. Normal attacks won't cause large bodies to stagger, but combo finishers will, giving an extra consideration to crowd control and enemy order. Since there's no buffering in Kingdom Hearts 1 or 2, intentionally timing the attacks will generally cause them to come out faster than simply mashing the button. While the game doesn't punish button mashing due to the generous window that attacks can be chained together, timing attacks is rewarded. This again allows high skill players to be rewarded without alienating low skill players. KH2 largely retains what is present in KH1 but gives less emphasis over spacing and timing of moves due to the bigger hitboxes. To compensate, it gives the option to juggle by pressing square during a combo. Similar to how finishes separate enemies, upper slash can be used as a juggle to separate enemies while allowing follow-ups to be done afterwards, acting as both a form of crowd control and as a combo extender. Using upper slash as late as possible into a grounded combo extends the combo further by allowing more hits before transitioning to the aerial combo, but using it will cause greater risk because you're more susceptible to being hit while on the ground. If upper slash is attempted in place of a combo finisher, finishing leap will be performed instead, allowing juggling of big enemies and groups that gives greater ground control at the cost of greater risk. Unlike in Kingdom Hearts 1, aerial combos carry enemies higher into the air, allowing extended juggles against aerial opponents while retaining quick chaining against grounded ones. KH2 adds a property to spells where they can be chained into each other and Keyblade swings. Spells are given their own combo finisher that can be activated from doing either spells or Keyblade swings beforehand. This also works in reverse, where spells can be used to activate Keyblade finishes or finishing leap. Instead of just adding more systems to increase depth, KH2 combined two existing systems in a more elegant way that adds depth while barely increasing complexity. Delaying attacks has another utility in KH2 compared to KH1. Some attack animations will be cancelled unless delayed. Aerial Spiral will hit the enemy 3 times if the entire animation is played, while it will only attack 2 times if the animation is cancelled early. There are times where the extra hit is beneficial, and other times where using the next move in the combo is desired instead. This adds more depth to the timing of the Keyblade swings without increasing the complexity of the game, although this is fairly underutilized because so few attacks use it and the change in effect is relatively minor. While KH1 and KH2 have fairly similar combos to each other with base abilities, KH3's difference is much more drastic. The other two games allow for quick chaining of aerial combos since most swings give downward momentum to land and cancel the end lag. KH3 suspends Sora in the air for a longer time after each swing, removing the difference in utility of aerial combos against grounded enemies the other two games had. While KH1 doesn't have significant gap closers on level 1 and barely has them on leveled runs, and KH2 adds several gap closers that activate in different situations with different trade-offs, every swing in KH3 will snap to the enemy regardless of context. KH3's lack of fall speed and snapping with attacks makes it very easy to follow up a combo finisher to juggle enemies infinitely. The lack of fall speed also allows you to chase down enemies that are much higher than you, causing the ground to barely be a factor because of how easy it is to stay in the air, either by chasing an aerial enemy or carrying a grounded enemy up. KH3 also buffers swings, making an attack come out in the first possible frame if the attack button is pressed while in the animation of an attack. While delaying swings still can be useful, timing is mostly pointless because mashing will always be faster, making the positioning and timing of the first two games much less relevant in KH3. Despite the simplicity of KH1's combos being relegated to a single button, there manages to be depth with how and when it's inputted. A decision is being made whether to use a grounded or aerial combo, which target is chosen to combo, where to start a combo, how to time that combo, and whether to finish that combo, very little of which is relevant in KH3. While a lot of this nuance isn't really relevant on easier difficulties, it can make the difference between life and death on level 1. Each one of the spells in Kingdom Hearts has a clear use case and a clear visual to help remember that use, creating an immediate connection between the spell's utility and the visual of it. KH2 has Fire as a close range group spell and Blizzard as a long range spell, with their use case and visuals being very distinct. Compared to an ability like Upper Slash, people tend to use spells more. While Upper Slash is useful and has a clear utility, its lack of flashiness and specific activation can make it quickly forgotten. Horizontal Slash takes this a step further by lacking both a distinct visual and a clear effect, causing it to be an underutilized move by most people even if they try to experiment with it. The command menu acts as another way to remember spells. If spells and other options are ever forgotten, a look at the bottom left of the screen will give a quick reminder of what is possible. To be reminded of contextual actions that are activated by an ability, such as Upper Slash, you need to go through the ability menu outside of combat to find a single ability that can easily be buried under dozens that exist. Compared to KH2, KH3 keeps Blizzard as a range spell, turns Fire back into a range spell, and adds a third range spell with Water. While Fire, Blizzard, and Water have differences, they are much more similar to each other than any of the other spells in the other games. They are all range shots that home in on enemies that have a slight area of effect at impact. While they have their differences, such as Water granting invincibility when cast and Blizzard freezing enemies and creating a rail to grind on, those secondary attributes are attached to spells that function almost identically when they could have been attached to more distinct spells instead. For example, Thunder has a different function as an area of effect spell while also having the unique attribute of electrifying enemies, making them deal damage to nearby enemies. Even though the individual options are clearly communicated, the ways they can be used and combined aren't. For example, magic is an obvious option, but the more advanced application of cancelling the lag by landing after using the spell in the air isn't quite as clear and needs to be figured out. Powerful strategies require several elements to be put together and can be seen as a reward for figuring out how to put those pieces together. It is hard to do this with the situation commands and shot locks in KH3 because they're powerful without needing to synergize them, have long cutscenes that can't be synergized, and there's no challenge in figuring out how or when to use them since they're given for free and don't require a resource to use. Part of the reason Kingdom Hearts can have a simple moveset is because it affects resources that need to be managed. The MP system in KH1 is broken on leveled runs since Cure only costs 1 bar of MP, making it too easy to heal for most enemies to pose a threat. Leaf Bracer makes casting Cure carrying no risk due to it giving invincibility while using Cure, and MP Rage restores MP when taking damage so you always have enough MP to use Cure. Level 1 fixes this by removing MP Rage and Leaf Bracer, making most encounters very threatening since everything will kill you in 2 hits. MP becomes a more true representation of Sora's health than its HP is. Having full health and 5 bars of MP will give a cure each, meaning that you'll die in 7 hits, assuming you can find the space to heal and don't recover any MP in that time. Since MP is restored through hitting with Keyblade swings, KH1 is designed around using all of the systems because of their interplay instead of focusing on a particular aspect or build. There's a loop where Keyblade swings restore MP, which is used for spells that can be used to clear out enemies to heal, so hitting enemies with the Keyblade is easier to restore MP to use more spells. Since Keyblade swings can be hard to hit and laggy, care needs to be put into when and how MP is restored. There are points in battles that are easier to restore MP, such as certain boss phases or when there are few enemies on screen. MP can be built up in these parts and saved to the parts of battles that are harder. An offensive spell might be used to kill enemies so they drop MP orbs to give enough MP for a defensive spell. Going straight for a defensive spell might give immediate safety, but can create a situation where taking damage is more likely. Regaining MP is faster the less you have of it. Because hoarding MP makes it build up slower, using spells as early as possible will increase the rate the spells can be cast. This will make you very vulnerable because of a lack of MP saved up for defensive spells. Using MP early is a high-risk option in exchange for a higher reward of being able to use more spells, creating a balancing act between keeping the MP high or low. Not only does the speed of gaining MP change depending on how much you have, the cost of spells also change. Fire and Blizzard use part of the MP bar instead of the whole bar like most other spells, causing their cost relative to other spells to be lower at higher MP. They cost an entire MP bar at low MP, but only cost a fraction of one with a lot of MP. Since you start battles with full MP, they are more MP efficient at the start of a fight. If damage is taken while at high MP, using Cure becomes more punishing because healing can cost over 5 uses of Fire and Blizzard, causing situations where you're low on HP but don't want to heal and waste MP. Since Ether's give enough MP for 3 cures, there is almost no reason to use a potion over an Ether except for the early game. Using Ethers restores whole MP bars regardless of how much you have, so using them at lower MPs will give less Fire and Blizzards than when used at higher MP. For example, using an Ether to go from no MP to 3 MP bars will give 6 Blizzards, while using it to go from 3 MP bars to 6 will give 15 Blizzards. Party members being able to heal gives another reason to refrain from using your own healing resources, but this is risky because party members can be inconsistent with their healing. This can be somewhat mitigated by pressing triangle to recall them when not locked on so they stop attacking the enemies to heal you. Sometimes using MP to heal party members and revive them can also be beneficial if they're given powerful items like elixirs. Since summons take a lot of MP, they give another reason to save up MP throughout a battle instead of using spells as quickly as possible. Because they require both party members to be alive, it is generally better to use summons at the start of battle before they die. This creates a conflict between using the bars of MP that give the most uses of Fire and Blizzard and using a summon at the easiest opportunity. Damage storage is an advanced technique on level 1 where magic is stronger after using a Keyblade finisher. This is because finishers have a damage multiplier that only resets when using another Keyblade swing, making magic store the damage multiplier from finishers to increase the damage for spells. This gives a reason to withhold magic later than it would otherwise be used, presenting a decision on whether to use the magic earlier when it provides more utility or save it for later when it provides more damage. KH2 drastically changes the MP system from KH1 by removing attacks recovering MP, replacing it with the cooldown that appears after reaching 0 MP that restores MP back to full after it's over. A unique attribute of Cure is that it always reduces your MP bar to 0. This presents a dilemma where healing puts you in a vulnerable state where you can't use spells. While KH1 presents a choice of either using Cure or other spells, KH2 presents a choice of what spells to use before Cure. This balances healing by limiting it more harshly while incentivizing using a variety of options in addition to Cure. While it might seem optimal to use spells as quickly as possible so MP won't be wasted when using Cure, doing this creates a vulnerable state similar to MP cooldown where you lose access to spells that provide utility like Reflect and Magnet. This creates a balancing act between saving enough MP to have access to these spells when they're required, while not having too much that you need to waste MP while using Cure. Since limits reduce MP to 0 like Cure, it creates a decision between using limits as an offensive option and using Cure as a defensive option. Your most powerful offensive tool locks off your most powerful defensive tool, and vice versa. Limits giving invincibility while using them makes the medium risk and high reward of limits not contrast the low risk, low reward option of Cure as well as it could. Despite this, limits could be seen as a reward for keeping party members alive since limits are dependent on them. Being able to take damage during limits, like you can with links, would force more consideration of when to use them and would require more skill to use them effectively. While Cure is the primary source of healing on most difficulties, items such as potions become a much more important resource on level 1. Because your health drops quicker, Cure usually doesn't come back frequently enough that it's always available when at low health. Battles become much harder once every item has been used, creating a race to beat the boss and manage your items before they run out. While it might seem like the MP cooldown forces running away once you run out of items, a lot of encounters provide little enough room that running away can take as much effort as fighting normally. Running away for the entirety of MP cooldown creates more time for potential mistakes with little reward to compensate. Going for damage is a riskier option than running away, but it benefits you by dealing damage, creating space through juggling the enemy, and building up drive gauge. A higher risk, higher reward option needs to be weighed up with a lower risk, lower reward option, creating a mix of aggression and defense. MP can be restored in many ways beyond waiting, such as MP orbs being obtained by attacking enemies, refilling the drive gauge to enter reform, using Stitch because he restores MP, or, most importantly, using Ethers. Ethers normally fully heal MP, but only heal half when in cooldown. This limits the usefulness of using Ethers for limits and Cure while allowing them to fully restore MP for normal magic. This avoids making potions redundant because Ethers restoring the entire MP cooldown would make Cure available with a single use, making them strictly better than potions like in KH1. Filling the drive gauge acts as another way to refill MP because entering forms refills MP. This is supported by the drive gauge being filled quicker when in MP cooldown. Intentionally going into MP cooldown can be desirable to fill your drive gauge faster, creating a reward in exchange for the risk. Spells can also be used to quickly fill drive to fill MP, creating a loop where they can be used to help restore each other. MP Rage, restoring MP when taking damage, gives it at the time when Cure would want to be used the most, creating a conflict between using MP for Cure or other spells. This makes potions much more useful because you're able to heal after taking damage while not compromising the MP gained from MP Rage. MP Rage gives another reason to use MP earlier because taking damage at full MP will do nothing. KH3's MP system largely works the same as KH2's, with the big difference being that critical mode makes the MP cooldown shorter in KH2 but makes it longer in KH3. The cooldown being shorter keeps fighting fast paced and tense because you're using spells more often and need to heal more frequently, balanced by doing less damage overall. On top of the longer cooldown, KH3 cuts the MP bar to balance it since it's so powerful in other difficulties, creating limited options without as much space to express yourself. Links, the equivalent to limits, restore health and require a full MP bar to use. There is very little reason to go for magic or healing when links achieve both while locking off the alternatives. Because links last 50 seconds and prevent dying while using them, you can easily get enough MP orbs during a link that you can use another one immediately afterwards. Limits encourage using spells in addition to them, while links encourage using them in place of other spells. Critical giving less MP to use spells is another reason to use links over spells, although this is somewhat compensated by links not fully healing on critical. If links are turned off, using spells quickly is incentivized by having a higher chance of getting grand magic when the situation meter is filled up. There's less reason to save MP because spells that provide utility in potential future situations don't exist. Delaying use of spells mostly boils down to dealing damage earlier or later. Without the critical converter ability, Grand Magic makes getting forms less likely in favor of Grand Magic, giving another reason to use links over magic. In KH1 and KH2, the most powerful options like summons, limits, and forms require party members to be alive, forcing more considerations of when options are used. Switching party members mid-battle in KH2 can help keep them alive, or they can be healed to revive them at the cost of using healing resources. This limitation is removed in KH3 except for team attacks. The only limit to how many times you can use links or shotlocks in a row is how many ethers or refocuses you have, often ending a fight before the boss has a chance to fight back. Trying to do the same in KH2 often won't work because your party members are so fragile in level 1 and will die constantly. Similar to weapon switching in other games, forms act as a change in playstyle. What separates them from switching weapons is that they're also power-ups, making them a reward for building up a resource. KH3 randomly gives forms once the situation meter fills up. Critical Converter makes it guaranteed, making it a consistent goal that can be planned around while also reducing the clutter of the situation commands by removing attraction flows, so I'll be discussing how forms work with Critical Converter on. Similar to how MP needs to be built up by attacking mid-battle in KH1, KH2 and KH3 have a form gauge that needs to be built up mid-fight by attacking. Since damage is so low outside of forms in KH3, the goal at the start of battle isn't to deal damage, but to effectively build up forms so proper damage can be dealt. KH2 allows a drive gauge to be built up and stored before an encounter, allowing you to trigger them at the start of encounters and trivialize some of the shorter ones. In longer fights, a single form isn't sufficient, so subsequent forms need to be built up mid-battle like KH3. Once a form has been built up in KH3, it becomes a game of managing the current forms while building up new ones. Since forms are attached to keyblades, the keyblade switching in KH3 allows switching between forms. When the situation gauge is filled up, you gain the form of the current keyblade, sometimes forcing use of an undesirable keyblade for a desirable form. For example, you might be relying on Guardian form for second chance to avoid dying, but you change keyblade to build up another form. Some forms have a second phase that acts as a reward for the increased effort of building up the situation gauge a second time. The reason building up several keyblade forms is important is because different forms excel in different situations. For example, Hammer form is effective at staggering Marshmallow, but it's hard to hit him with melee attacks during his armored phase due to his increased aggression. This can either be circumvented by switching to a range form like Twin Guns or using Marshmallow's aggression against him to build up counterattacks with Shield form. Once the forms have been built up, they need to be managed because they have a timer. Many bosses have a desperation move where they become invincible and use their strongest attack. Being in a form during a desperation move wastes that form, so switching to a different keyblade can preserve it for when it's more useful. If you have 3 keyblade forms built up, you need to choose which form is wasted during downtime. Switching between keyblades also gives access to that keyblade's unique shotlock, with fully charging it giving a different effect. A desirable shotlock might be in an undesirable form, such as the partially charged shotlocks for Hero's Journey and Ever After healing. Since most of the shotlocks do area of effect damage, they are mostly interchangeable and rarely have situations where one is more desirable than another. For the most part, it boils down to switching to the shotlock that deals the most damage or using the healing ones mentioned earlier. While switching between forms in KH3 gives more fluidity and options, KH2's commitment to entering and exiting forms makes the decisions more meaningful. Using forms in KH2 costs drive bars, which lock off summons and other forms because they share the resource. Once you're in a drive form, you're committed to that form unless it's cancelled, losing access to it without more drive bars. Most drive forms have limited defensive options, such as not having guard, that create risk and reason to want to cancel them. Since entering forms breaks combos and restores HP and MP, you might activate a form to heal just to cancel it because it lacks the proper defensive options to survive. Even when effectively using a form, KH2 reduces the form's duration when dealing damage to force a mix-up of strategies, which is absent in KH3. This commitment is less relevant in KH3 since you can almost always switch out of forms to avoid their weaknesses, making them mostly irrelevant. Using the finisher of a form in KH3 gives damage and invincibility in exchange for your current form and progress towards a form, making it a commitment to use early. KH3 can make each switch of the keyblade take away some duration of the form so it retains its fluidity while giving more consideration to switching. This difference in commitment can also be seen in anti-form compared to rage form. Entering a form in KH2 is risky because there is a chance of activating anti-form, which can't be cancelled. Rage form appears when low in health and gives control over whether it's activated and deactivated, that removes the risk of anti-form. Using Risk Drive to lower your health in exchange for damage isn't that risky because you're not committed to Rage Form, while the only effective way to exit Anti-Form is by dealing damage. While KH3 has a lot more forms than KH2, a lot of the forms are redundant. Many Keyblades use the same weapons in their forms, and a lot of those weapons have the same use, to deal melee damage. The biggest exceptions are Counter Shield because it rewards defending, Twin Guns because it deals range damage, and Mirage Staff because it acts as a magic melee weapon that doubles as a range weapon after dashing. KH2's lower total forms gives them less overlap than KH3, giving them similar variety while having much less bloat. Techniques in KH1, such as Sonic Blade, are the equivalent of reaction commands in KH2 because they have specific contexts that need to be triggered to use them. Their MP cost shows they act as a reward for building up MP to use them. Unlike reaction and situation commands, they are not always desirable to use because they take a resource that can be used for other techniques. While it is almost always desirable to go for a reaction command, they are designed as a reward for the challenge of getting them to appear. They might seem to appear randomly in easier difficulties, but they have tells and ways to activate them. Sykes' is about correctly positioning to be next to the Claymore before it disappears. Malush's is a choice between two after successfully defending against the Scythe Spin. Many reaction commands appear as a reward for juggling or hitting an enemy, such as Fat Bandits. Reaction commands also teach how the organization bosses function through their nobodies having the same reaction command, such as snipers using Warp Snipe like Xigbar or Dragoons using Jump like Zaldin. Some reaction commands take skill to use effectively, needing to be timed or positioned properly. Sometimes delaying a reaction command after dealing damage would kill an enemy instead of knocking them away, such as Full Swing against large bodies. Sometimes positioning a reaction command will cause it to hit extra enemies, such as Cyclone. Some reaction commands have a minigame after activating it, with punishment if failed, such as Dual Stance or Gamble. Situation commands don't require as much skill to acquire or use as reaction commands. Team attacks are essentially given randomly and can barely be manipulated or monitored because there is no feedback on when or how they're obtained. Attraction flows appear randomly by hitting enemies that have a circle on them. While you don't have full control over when a reaction command appears, the triggers for enemy behavior that activates them can be directly observed, manipulated, and planned around, unlike situation commands, rewarding skill. The time limit to use situation commands is generous to ensure several can be used when obtained at once. By shortening the time limit, a decision would need to be made on which situation command to use. Positioning and timing of team attacks aren't as relevant as reaction commands because they either act as screen nukes, making positioning irrelevant, or they activate 20-second transformations that give time to reposition, making timing irrelevant. For the transformation situation commands, optimizing damage within the transformations takes some skill, but there is no risk of dying and it doesn't act as a reward for a resource like limits do. Kingdom Hearts has a variety of bosses that amount to more than having differences in timing and spacing of their attacks. Even with fights like Sephiroth that mostly consist of reacting and responding, his reaction command causes him to require more varied responses than simply guarding, and every defensive option needs to be timed to force more awareness of how he and other enemies attack. While several bosses consist of reacting and responding, many bosses introduce a gimmick while keeping the core combat intact. Vexen has a circle that chases you and spawns enemies if you're on it for too long, so you need to manipulate the position of the circle and Vexen to be able to attack Vexen safely. Luxord replaces your health with a meter that doubles as both health and a timer. Luxord's cards need to be dodged or dismissed while managing the time constraint and dealing with Luxord's tricky reaction commands. These bosses have differences that change the offensive options used against them, not just the defensive ones. Despite providing a variety of humanoid fights, Kingdom Hearts isn't afraid to deviate away from humanoids. The Cave of Wonders guarding requires you to scale it and alternate between the eyes while managing the enemies. Guard armor detaches parts of himself that need to be dodged simultaneously and destroyed to reduce the main body's health. Grim Reaper forces magic to be used to return the medallions to the chest in the middle to make him vulnerable. While these bosses are generally considered to be worse than the humanoid fights, the variety paces them and keeps bosses from becoming redundant. When it comes to the humanoids, attacks can be used to juggle them. Revenge Value is a system where bosses will use a counterattack to break out of combos to avoid them being juggled infinitely. Infinite combos aren't a problem for enemies because other enemies pose a threat while stunning the one you're attacking, but most boss fights are one-on-one encounters where no such threat exists. Revenge Value can be manipulated to intentionally force a counterattack so you can punish it and extend your combo, such as against Roxas. Having varied counterattacks would prevent a loop of baiting a boss for an entire battle, but looping the boss and successfully punishing them still generally takes more effort than doing a normal combo. While serving its purpose by preventing most infinite combos, it doesn't communicate its existence or values. People will probably intuit that attacking an enemy too much will cause a counterattack, but this can be confusing before the mechanic is learned and lead to trial and error even after it's learned. It could be argued that needing to mentally track how close you are to triggering a counterattack is a part of the challenge, and discovering it can be a satisfying process, but a visualization would allow for more complex manipulation of the revenge value. If visualized, they can make the revenge value more complex with moves that subtract revenge value, different counterattacks that depend on revenge value, persistent revenge value that carries over several combos, and several other mechanics. Introducing these without a visualization would be unreasonable because the information is too complex to play around without feedback. Similarly, KH1 removing the health bar in level 1 could be seen as removing a crutch because the game functions the same without explicitly showing that information, but there's no way to properly weigh up your options since you don't know how much they do at level 1 without looking it up or extensively testing it. You need to plan which equipment, items and abilities are brought into battle because different abilities are better suited for different encounters. While Combo Plus allows for longer combos against bosses, not using it allows you to quickly get to combo finishes that excel at crowd control. Slapshot is a fast move that extends combos but is prone to missing against some enemies with shorter keyblades. KH1's keyblades become irrelevant when one with better stats comes along, but KH2's keyblades have different abilities attached to them that give them situational uses, which KH3 extends to accessories as well. Similarly, you need to choose a party layout based on their strengths and weaknesses because you're limited to 2 at any given time, which is removed in KH3 by allowing every party member to be used at once. When the party is changed, KH2 lets you customize before fights, which allows you to properly use recently obtained abilities and changes in party layout. KH3 extends this to every death with the prepare and retry button. Being in the air is a compromised position because there are limited defensive options. This isn't a concern in KH1 because none of the attacks send Sora up, letting him return to the ground quickly after being hit. In KH2 and KH3, enemies can juggle you in a similar way that you can juggle them, making being able to touch the ground a challenge itself. In KH2, the early game doesn't give access to many defensive options in the air, while the late game limits the space with confined arenas that make it hard to create distance between you and the enemy. Most aerial defensive options send further in the air or stall downward momentum, giving immediate safety at the cost of future danger. Aerial recovery is the only option to break out of combos in exchange for sending upwards, which is partially why being high in the air is such a common occurrence. Aerial recovery should be timed because it only briefly gives invincibility which the enemies can punish afterwards when you're vulnerable, so matching it can lead to death. Aerial dodge in KH2 has a single use in the air that sends you up, making it a limited resource that needs to be cautiously used because of the trade-offs. KH3 removes the height gain and makes it work more like a dash that can be infinitely used. Compared to guard, Reflect can be chained together and into Keyblade combos, used during a form, blocks every side, and gives a counterattack at the cost of MP. Reflect can also be used in the air unlike guard, giving a reusable aerial defense at the cost of MP, giving more reason to save MP. Reflect still stalls in the air, so it's not a free way to return to the ground, with the exception being Final Form which carries momentum of spells. While Reflect can be powerful, it needs to be done in response to an enemy attack, forcing awareness of the fight to get any reward. Limits and drives act as combo breakers because they can be done out of hit stun, similar to aerial recovery. The invincibility of limits can also be used to bypass an attack. Since they use limited resources and have effects outside of being combo breakers, using them like this can limit their other use of effectively dealing damage, creating a trade-off between offense and defense. Since you take damage when being launched into the air, you need to manage your health while returning to the ground. If you're unsure if you can touch the ground without dying, you can use Cure to give safety at the cost of MP cooldown. In KH2, items can't be used in the air to balance them being a more plentiful resource, so Cure is needed to heal unless grounded or using the more limited resource of the drive gauge. This creates a hierarchy of healing, where items are the most plentiful resource that can be used in the most limited situations, and the drive gauge is the most limited resource that is available in most situations. KH3 gives the ability to use guard, potions, infinite dashes, and a double jump in the air, so it's not a compromised position compared to the ground, removing the complex disadvantage state of KH2. The rigidity in KH2's options is probably intentional because it needs to be specifically programmed to function that way. I've been primarily talking about the depth of the combat because playing harder difficulties like level 1 gives a reason to engage with the depth further, with not much else that it provides. Most people play Kingdom Hearts because of the story or that the combat feels good to play, which can be achieved by playing on the easier difficulties. KH1's combat is generally not considered as good as the other games because it lacks flashy attacks. The depth of the precise positioning required in KH1 doesn't feel good. KH2 feels better because attacks are faster, or at least that they feel faster. Even though KH2 retains the 3-hit combo and slow grounded attacks of KH1, it splits the second hit into 2 smaller hits. While it's functionally very similar because you're locked into an animation as if it were a single attack, it feels like you're attacking faster than in KH1. KH2's attacks also feel good because they change contextually to ensure attacks will connect. While this can make the gameplay mindless to the point where you might as well be watching it on easier difficulties, the fact that it's gameplay that responds directly to your input makes it feel better than simply watching it. KH3 has slower attacks that do less relative damage, which makes them feel worse to pull off, but this creates a bigger contrast between the base movement and the forms. Contrast paces a game because it paces out the high intensity moments between the low intensity ones. If high spectacle is given all the time, it starts to lose meaning. There needs to be a baseline for the spectacle to exist in contrast to. Roxas's slow combos are reminiscent of KH1's combos, creating a giant contrast when switching to Sora's flashy combos. Forms feel good because they're an increase to the base power. Being able to move while attacking wouldn't feel as good in final form if Sora could do it in his base form. The progression of acquiring abilities creates a contrast between the start and the end of the game, giving a sense of progression without needing to level up. KH3 has a grander scale, using the cutscenes of the situation commands to provide catharsis instead of keyblade swings. Since all of them play dozens of times throughout a playthrough, they lose significance through a lack of contrast. Reaction commands are quicker, appear at the right time to punctuate a fight, and are unique to every enemy. KH3's excess of systems and mechanics gives a lot of freedom to be stylish with them. While playing stylishly might not be practical, the reason to play this way is that it feels good to play and watch. These combos are stylish partially because they lack practical applications, not in spite of it. Taking selfies adds style to a combo because it essentially acts as a taunt, showing confidence because it has no practical application and just adds visual flair. Using a technique called item cancelling allows you to switch between Keyblade mid-combo without lag to chain different Keyblade form combos together. While it has niche use, it gives a playground of stylish combos to work with. KH1 rewards experience points, called tech points, for doing harder tech like using an enemy's weakness against them. Instead, tech points could reward play that is stylish rather than more effective. There is already incentive for playing effectively because it's more effective. Giving experience for playing stylishly would give incentive to play in a way that's harder and looks cool, which many games do through a ranking system. There is no reason to engage with stylish combos except for intrinsic motivation, which might be the ideal reason to be stylish, but putting tech points could indicate towards playing this way and help teach people different ways they can do it. Kingdom Hearts has a wide range of appeal because it offers depth at higher difficulties and feels good to play on lower difficulties. While it's generally accepted that the games are fun on lower difficulties, what they provide in higher difficulties is often overlooked. This becomes more apparent when talking about level 1, which many people aren't even aware is in the game at all. As I've outlined in this essay, Kingdom Hearts has a lot of depth when playing the game at level 1 that I think deserves more attention. If I've intrigued you to try playing at level 1, I would recommend starting with KH2.